welcome to Hocus Focus, the show where we explore the strange and unexplained. My name's Sara Mondaini.
And my name is Thomas Sheridan.
And we hope you enjoy this week's journey through the weird and wonderful world of Fortean exploration. And as ever, thank you for joining us again. We're delighted to have you with us, and we're really glad that you're enjoying the show. So continue to tell your friends and bring them along too. And how's life been treating you, Thomas?
Yeah, pretty good. The weather's definitely getting on the better now. It's not not cold all the time, just some of the time now, but it's been mostly dry. So I even had nearly a thunderstorm the other day. That's how much it warmed up one day. But yeah, I'm keeping busy and delighted with how people have been commenting and loving the show, and of course that means an awful lot. And I want to thank Saturday Morning Seance again for sending us another location report last week. I didn't thank them, but as usual, go over to their channel and give them a subscription.
Yeah, I've been busy here myself, working on our side project, which will unveil at some point in the future. And I'm also working on a couple of new videos to put out about mythology and folklore. So keep your eyes peeled for those coming soon as well. So without further ado, let's get into our first topic tonight. And tonight we're delving into the story of the Dover Demon, a creature that shook a small town in Massachusetts back in April 1977. And the northeastern states of the US are known for their rugged hinterlands, deep forests, that all-round hauntology vibe that stems from countless films, books, and weird things that have been reported from that corner of the world. And it's little wonder that the area inspired one of the most famous horror writers of all time, H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft's imagination was fed by the rich history and architecture of Massachusetts, and he used real places as a starting point for his eerie tales, and then he enhanced them with invented names to create his fictional Lovecraft country. But Lovecraft's work isn't the only thing that's eerie in Massachusetts. The quiet town of Dover was shaken by a series of encounters with an otherworldly being in April 1977. The Dover Demon, as it came to be known, was first sighted by 15-year-old Abby Brabham and her boyfriend on their drive home from a party. The creature they saw was humanoid in shape and standing on its hind legs with a disproportionately large head and a very lanky body. It had almond-shaped eyes that glowed an eerie green and no discernible features. Over the next few days, more teenagers reported seeing the creature. The entity was said to be about 3.5 feet tall, thin, humanoid frame, and an oversized spherical head. Its face was blank, no features except for its glowing eyes, and it moved with an eerie, almost otherworldly gait. On the night of the 21st of April, 17-year-old Bill Bartlett and his two friends were driving home along Farm Street when they also saw the entity. Bill had pulled up to drop his friends off when he noticed the creature standing there, and he described it as being 3.5 feet tall, again with a thin humanoid frame, an oversized head with no features except for orange eyes. The entity was startled by the teenagers' arrival, and it leapt away into the shadows, leaving Bill and his friends in a state of shock. He rushed home to tell his father, and he sketched a picture of what he had encountered. And as the sightings of the Dover Demon increased, it was found that all the sightings took place near local water sources, leading some people to speculate that water might be its natural habitat and the creature was some sort of aquatic cryptid. Now, unlike the Sandown Clown incident in the UK that we discussed last week, there was no sightings of any crafts prior to the appearance of this creature, and that led many to speculate that it may be some form of cryptid, especially as it appeared to want to remain hidden from human interaction, and it seemed to want nothing to do with them at all. The investigation into the creature's origins and motives continued, and experts began looking at maps of these sightings in the local area, trying to find clues that they could shed light on its movements. And they plotted a straight line across the map of Dover, and a pattern emerged. one that seemed to suggest the creature could be migrating or travelling through the town, but with no interest in staying or being there. And as usual, logical explanations were put forward: an abandoned moose cub or a calf, but moose habitats were non-existent in Dover, and no sketches or descriptions of the creature bore any resemblance to a cow or a calf. And so the mystery deepened, while some speculated that it was all an elaborate hoax or a figment of people's imaginations. An interesting point here is Farm Street, where Bill Bartlett saw the thing. Farm Street was already notorious for being full of local folklore and legend, and it was famous for one story of the devil himself riding down it on horseback into the secluded area around it. It was also known locally as an area for buried treasures, and there's a stone outcropping in the woods off Farm Street called the Poker Stone. And a local Fortean researcher called Lauren Coleman, who was investigating the reports at the time, believes it may have originally been called the Puka Stone, after the fairy folk in Celtic folklore. So that's the Dover Demon. What do you make of that, Thomas?
Well, it's fantastic and interesting. The first thing that jumped out there was when you said that they plotted its movements and they continued along a straight line. And the first thing I thought about was, ley lines or energy paths across the landscape. That's something that I used to be kind of skeptical about for many years, that you don't have straight lines in nature. But apparently, the more I've researched into these energy paths and ley lines, there definitely is something to them moving straight across the landscape. So it'll be very interesting to know if the path of the Dover Demon passed over. Now, you mentioned that place that could potentially be called Puka Rock, but passed over any kind of ancient sites, Indian sites, megaliths, whatever, wells or anything. There's definitely a very interesting story there. It seems when, okay, there's no spaceship arrived, and you do say cryptid, but what is a cryptid? Is it cryptids is a thing that really needs to be defined into two different things now. Physical, zoomorphic or anamorphic cryptids and potential spiritual entities. I think there's a very real distinction there. And I'd put this one very much in the spiritual entity of things. Or then there could be even something's a manifestation of both, like a tulpa that's brought about by the personalities and the consciousness of the people who actually witness it, which is something, I heard you talk about before, and I find that very interesting the more I think about it. There's actually two great horror writers in New England, Stephen King as well. And I've explored New England extensively. I spent a lot of time there, from Connecticut all the way up to Maine, and I know it very well. And I think the reason why, this is interesting you said this about the puka. New England has this energy about it, this ontological energy about it. I think goes right back to the Puritans when they first started to settle in what they called the Bay Colony around, Cape Cod and that part of Massachusetts. Literally, they were farming land that was on the edge of vast forests, and literally beyond the forest, it might as well have been outer space. And you see in the movies like The Witch, you would have had these people coming from Cambridgeshire or Devon, all parts of England where you had large Puritan populations, Norfolk, all those areas, and they settled in this part of New England that was literally the edge, the demarcation line, the terminator between their perceived Christian world and the world of the pagan devils, and all beyond the wood, the tree line. And I wouldn't be surprised if this constant fear that the Puritans had charged that landscape into all its, energetic forms and all its ontological stories. The Dover Demon, I definitely do believe that story and there's one reason. I think the demographic, it's mostly teenagers who saw it, and generally, and I think the puka thing might have even come from Puritans who moved from Ireland, or even from Scotland or somewhere like that, who probably named it puka back in the day, bringing the folklore with them. Yeah, it's a fantastic story. After it vanished, was there any other, recurrent sightings of the thing?
No, there isn't. And Cal, the police chief at the time, is actually called Cal Sheridan. Don't know if he's any relation, but
Very my,
good
my brother's
Irish name there.
my brother's called Carl, so it's pretty funny.
Well, at the time, he was speaking about it last that I could find in 2006. And he said in 2006 that this thing has haunted him for almost 30 years. And he said that he knew the kids involved and they were good kids and they wouldn't have made something up like this. And even in 2006, he was still getting phone calls and emails from paranormal investigators about the incident, 30 years later. There's been nothing since. No. And I'm thinking, going back to what you were saying about the Puritans there, would that be a similar thing to say what happens with deep towns, where certain towns attract a certain kind of person? Maybe there are also secluded areas like that attract or collect sightings in a similar or psychic way. And the reason might be, like you say, because of the charge there from people like the Puritans.
They lived in perpetual terror of demons and devils and witches and all this kind of thing, and they kind of put that onto the Native Americans who lived there too. On top of that, it reminds me of the kind of Carl Jung, and Nietzsche also said something similar, that if you continually stare into hell, you will become hell. So it's almost like their persistent fear of the world that they inhabited had become a kind of a hell. Well, also the fodder of fantastic folklore. But the thing, back to the Puritan thing, the puka stone thing. There's I can't help think that the megaliths in New England sort of might have something to do with this fairy folklore there as well, or be a part of it. It makes no sense. What, like for instance, in a town called Heath in Western Massachusetts, not far from the New York State border, and a place synonymous with some incredible UFO activity back in the 60s and 70s. There's a ring of stones called on top of a place called Sentinel Hill. Now it was called Sentinel Hill by H.P. Lovecraft, and it was in the Dunwich Horror. And he said that the stone circles, very interesting this, and I mentioned this in my Lovecraft documentary, that he alluded to, and the way it's the classic Lovecraft thing. Some of the more eccentric types believe that the stones actually predate the Indians, as if he was trying to leak it out there like a truth bomb, that these could be the same as the stone circle builders that were in Europe at this, back in the Neolithic and Bronze Age. So this is why the whole New England thing is so fascinating, because there's still so many unanswered mysteries about it. The shape of the Dover demon fascinates me too. Its head sounds like, and there's a drawing of it, where its head seems to be divided into two sections, north and top and bottom, two bulbous things, almost like a hippopotamus or something.
However, with the pictures I saw of it, I did think it was quite cute looking. It wasn't particularly scary. Not saying if you come face to face with it on a dark road, it wouldn't be scary, but it looked quite potato looking to me.
Yes, almost like a children's stuffed toy would have a
Yes.
head. There is like the plastic hippos in that Hungry Hippo game. Its head looked like that. Now you see that could also be part of this telepathic resolution, that they're actually that game could have been really popular at the time or something, or on TV ads. You and I talk about this all the time, and that's how they rationalize. That theory you have that these things will try to culturally mimic, but often very crudely, what they expect humans who see them in this reality to want to see. Like the Sandown Clown last week, and you mentioned the BBC Test Clown, Test Card F.
Well, there's another incident that relates to the same area with the Dover demon, and that was in 1972. And it was just down the road from Farm Street where the main sightings were. And there was a high school student called Mark Sennett, and him and his friends said they saw what they thought was a demon around Channing Pond on Springdale Avenue. And he also said that at the time, during the early 70s, because the Dover demon was the mid to late 70s, but around the early 70s, there was talk all over the high school in Dover regarding strange things being in the woods. So it was kind of all the kids at school, you know, were talking about it. And we know what kids are like when they get talking, frightening each other. They'd all seen things, and it was quite, nobody wanted to go into the woods.
Yeah. And all that stuff charges the landscape. And then when something happens, I often wonder if it's a psychic eruption from a kind of a psychic volcano of all these local legends and stuff that explodes to the surface.
Yeah. Like a pot that's, or a pressure cooker that's just going to go off eventually.
Yeah,
Layers and layers.
Exactly. It's been building in the background, simmering like a pressure cooker. Yeah.
What
And
I like about this story, though, and I'm sure you'll agree, it has this real 1970s hauntology vibe to it, and it's so eerily familiar to all those 70s and 80s American horror films that we've seen and we used to watch, involving kids in a small town surrounded by hinterlands, the local police chief trying to solve what supernatural force had taken a grip on the town. A very similar sort of vibe to the film that we're going to be reviewing later, really.
and and mentioning Stephen King, in both Salem's Lot and The Mist, leaving the area becomes almost a destructive or impossible thing, where whatever exists in the area, whether it's the vampires in Jerusalem Lot or the mist in in uh in the film The Mist, they can't leave it. It's almost like the area has a grip on them, and they're almost like doomed from the moment that they encounter this thing.
Yeah, I thought that watching films, thinking, why don't you just get the hell out of there? And it's almost like, well, they can't leave. Or somebody in the film will say, you can't leave, you have to stay.
Well, in the book, there was a One for the Road. It was a short story that was the follow up to say Jerusalem's Lot that Stephen King wrote, and it's all about the towns around there where the locals live in terror and wear religious trinkets and are afraid of their lives, of the vampires, even the deer of vampires and things like that live in the location. And I think it was printed in one of the Bachman books, the Bachman book collection by Stephen King that came out in the 80s. But I remember like reading that many years ago, thinking, why don't you leave? Why don't you leave? But you can't, because it's like that song Hotel California by the Eagles. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave.
Yeah, and I think it's a similar thing. If you leave in these experiences, you're going to end up like the protagonist in Jerusalem's Lot. You have to go back. The curiosity takes you back.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I was nearly eaten by a lake in Maine once, and I wanted to go back, had to go back and see it again. Just to, I've written about it. It's on my Substack page. But there's something about that landscape. It has to be the Puritans, and interesting enough, I find the similar landscapes where the Puritans were in England in those counties also has a lot of hauntology as well. It's almost like for the amplification of Christian fanaticism turbocharged in symbiotic tandem, the hauntological undercurrents of the environment.
And it makes you wonder if that's why people who, like us, who are interested in that kind of thing and they're not religious fanatics, find it fascinating and interesting and want to go and explore it, whereas the religious fanatics who've charged it over the years are absolutely terrified.
Yeah, it's a Notre Dame situation, and
Yeah.
it also makes you wonder how much faith do they have in the religion, whether they're a Puritan who's terrified of a devil beyond, or witches in beyond the farmstead in the woods, or an Irish person in the countryside who's deeply Catholic. terrified of the fairies. It's like, well, how much faith do you really have? I mean, we've been working on something, and we had a discussion when I brought up you thought was interesting that uh, if we were pagans, would we have this? If the world remained pagan, say countries like here in England, would we have the same relationship with the fairies that the Christians have? Very interesting, a very interesting question that is, I think.
Yeah, and at the moment, are the fairies hiding behind the sofa, like when the Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking on the door because they don't want to
Yeah.
go, they're not interested.
Yeah, well, they did say that the fairies would return when Ireland was at its greatest moment of peril. Now, I think that it was they were written down by Christians. Their greatest moment of peril to them, the Christian monks who wrote it, could be that Christianity ends in Ireland, and then all these archetypes and these elementals all appear. And there's something to it because you look at, say, you take England, right, and even America. Since the 1950s, Christianity has vanished, but Forteana has exploded in that same period. You could probably draw a line between the end of Christianity in America and Roswell, the start of Roswell. And the same in England. You could probably do similar things between famous paranormal cases there as well. You know, the Borley Rectory, is that symbolic of the end of Christianity and the begin and the return of the old gods manifested in what they call ghosts, you know. I mean, it's what makes these topics so endlessly fascinating because you can go into all tangents and circles all over the place.
With regards to the fairies, a lot of people are afraid of the fairies, and with good reason. But myself, I'm not afraid of the fairies because I know to keep a distance and I know to be respectful, and I'm not a religious fanatic. I'm not going to bother them with that. I'm not a human being that they need to avoid. Do you know what I mean? And I think they know. I think the fae know that.
Yeah, but you see, the fae in England are not the same species of fairies as the She in Ireland. The She in Ireland are far more hardcore. And it'd be just like the natural world where you might have a snake in one island, a species of snake in one island that doesn't have venom, and a species of snake in another island beside it that does have venom.
Yeah, so we've got grass snakes and you might have cobras, sort of thing.
Yeah, that kind of rattlesnakes. Yeah.
So that's the Dover Demon. If anybody watching is from the Massachusetts area, the New England area, and you've encountered anything like that, or you've heard of you know of anybody who's encountered anything like that, or you've got any ideas as to what the psychic charge might be within the area, then please put your thoughts in the comments box. I'd be really interested to read them. The Longdendale Valley is said to be one of the most haunted places in Britain. We are 15 minutes from Manchester and situated in the Pennines between Manchester and Sheffield. The valley and the surrounding area have a reputation for strange phenomena, and the valley also crosses over within a spot known as UFO Alley, which became well known throughout the UFO community as the most active place for UFO sightings. The Longdendale lights are one of the many strange phenomena here. They are strange, flickering lights which in the past have been said to be the devil. A more modern-day folklore believes them to be alien spaceships. There lies in the valley the remains of an American B-29, which crashed in 1948, killing all 13 crew. The aircraft crashed at higher shelf stones on the Bleaklow moorland. It was on a routine daytime flight from RAF Scampton in Lincoln to the US Air Force Base at Burton Wood near Warrington. The pilot, Captain Landon P. Tanner, and his co-pilot, Captain Harry Stroud, were flying by instruments due to the low cloud in the area. At 11 a.m, the craft hit the ground, 610 metres above sea level, and the aircraft was engulfed in flames. The debris of the aircraft was scattered, with only the tail section left intact. Both visitors and locals have claimed to have seen the ghost of Captain Landon P. Tanner. There have been many sightings of him in his flying jacket, just wandering around lost among the wreckage. During World War II, there were many unexplained air crashes in the valley, and the lights have been blamed for the high occurrences of almost 50 planes that have crashed here. The strangeness doesn't stop there, though. It has been said that Captain Landon P. Tanner and many other pilots who crashed in the area saw the Longdendale lights and flew towards them, believing it was the aerodrome, whereas in actual fact they were flying towards the high peaks of the valley. The wreckage still lies here, frozen in time. In the 1970s, a local man found a ring at the site which was identified as Captain Landon Tanner's wedding ring, and it was returned to his daughter. There have been many different explanations given for the lights, from supernatural to scientific. Local legends tell stories of the lights being the ghosts of Roman soldiers up on the moors. Other legends tell of the Irish navvies who built the nearby Woodhead tunnels and who lived in such appalling conditions during the construction that a cholera epidemic outbroke. 24 navvies died and were buried on unconsecrated ground. It is rumoured that the lights are their ghosts carrying their torches to and from work. Some of the more scientific explanations are that the lights are a phenomena known as earth lights. These can occur during earthquakes when tectonic plates rub together and cause glowing lights from the friction. Scientists also say the paranormal ghostly sightings that surround our area could be due to heavy quartz content in the rocks, causing ionisation in the atmosphere, which can create altered states of consciousness within some people. What do I believe as someone who lives here? Well, I believe anything is possible, and we refer to strange happenings as supernatural only because we don't understand them. To me, the Longdendale lights are a mystery, steeped in various local folklores, Old English folklore and legends, which all have their origins dipped in aspects of truth. Our valley is full of phenomena, both ghostly and aerial. The legends of Longdendale are peppered all over its high peaks and rolling hills.
In this week's folk horror cinema, I am returning back to my childhood in school, and one particular event where literally everybody came into the school the next day and said, "Did you see that film last night about the vampires with David Soul?" And to a child, everyone was like, "It's the best and most terrifying thing I'd ever seen." And the film was the TV miniseries adaptation of Stephen King's story, Salem's Lot, which tells the story of vampires in New England. And Sarah is going to review the film for us this week.
Salem's Lot is a horror novel by Stephen King that was published in 1975, and that novel was then adapted into a two-part television miniseries in 1979, which follows the plot of the novel very closely, and it's directed by Tobe Hooper and has an all-star cast including David Soul as the protagonist Ben Mears and James Mason as the enigmatic antique dealer Richard Straker. The supporting cast includes Bonnie Bedelia and Lance Kerwin, who also give good performances throughout the show. And the story is set in the small town of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine, and revolves around a writer called Ben Mears, played by David Soul. And he returns to his hometown after many, many years away, and he wants to write a book about the spooky old Marston house, which has a dark history and sits on top of the hill overlooking the town. Ben had a bad experience with the house as a child when he witnessed a hanging ghost, and the house has since been purchased by a Hungarian businessman called Kurt Barlow, because he and his business partner want to set up a lucrative antiques furniture shop in the town. Barlow is away on business, and his partner Richard Straker is living at the house and handling all the business dealings. As Ben settles back into the town, strange things begin to happen. A young boy disappears, and his brother returns from a trip to the Marston house acting strangely. And soon, more and more townsfolk begin to disappear or turn up dead, and it becomes clear that something sinister is in Salem's Lot. Ben and a small group of allies, including his old high school teacher, Matt Burke, along with a teenage boy named Mark, uncover the truth about what is going on at the Marston house, about the vampire who has taken up residence there. And throughout the movie, nobody is paying any attention to what Ben or Matt are saying about the evil in the place. Even though people are acting strange, dying, and then coming back to feed off the living and make them vampires too. Now, a couple of things that really stood out for me in the film was firstly, the young boy, Mark Petrie. He was a Fortean and he had a big interest in horror films and monsters and magic. And throughout the first half of the film, he was constantly asked when he was going to grow out of this phase. And his friends and family all thought he was a bit weird. And he ignored the digs at his interest. And he told his dad that this is who I am. Anyway, eventually, it was his interest in monsters and ghouls that saved his life, because thanks to his interest, he knew how to deal with a bloodthirsty vampire tapping at the window in the middle of the night. So I really liked that, and he was venerated in the end. And it just showed that there's more to this world than being a rational-minded accountant like his father wanted for him. And I also liked the hauntology of it and how it affected the main character, Ben. Now, he had experienced some strange stuff at the house as a child, and he wanted to go back and see the place as an adult, maybe to see if it was his childhood imagination that had got the better of him, or whether it was a real evil place. And it even starts to remind you of your own childhood and strange things that you've experienced. And it brings on a strange kind of nostalgia, a curiosity, and you start to wonder if there's something wrong with you for going back there in your own mind. And he even starts to question why he's there when he asks if evil houses attract a certain kind of person. And if that's true, he said, then what am I doing here? And there's layers and layers to this film. So I'll talk more about it in the discussion after Thomas has given us his review.
Well, how many hours and days do we have? This film is first of all, it's the greatest TV miniseries ever made, the TV movie ever made. David Soul was a huge star at the time. He had not been long out of Starsky and Hutch and had lots of hit singles. And you don't realize how good of an actor he is until you see him playing Ben Mears in Salem's Lot. And the rapport he has with the fellow characters, whether it's his girlfriend or girlfriend's father, who's a doctor, or other people in the town, is very realistic and very well done. He's a man who's back in this town, but he's resentful of having to be there. His wife has died in a car accident, I believe. So he's kind of like on a journey to find himself again, maybe believing he was perhaps cursed by what he witnessed in the Marston house. And his rapport with the young boy Mark, who's a fantastic character, like I said. I mean, that was me when I was that age. It was obsession with comics and horror stories and everything, and especially his interest in Houdini like magic, because that actually helps him later on in the film. But they don't have an instant rapport at all. In fact, they kind of look at each other suspiciously until they actually are bonded together through an event that follows the killing of his parents, which is a phenomenal scene in the film, where the vampire, this Nosferatu type entity, appears in the kitchen with the Catholic priest, or I don't know, is it Catholic or Protestant, I don't know, is Mark's parents and Mark, and an earthquake kind of like takes place before it. So it's a psychic. This vampire is so powerful. It has a psychic charge that it affects the environment around it, and then it arises from its cloak on the floor and comes up, and this is that tremendous scene. John Mills was it John Mills or James Mason?
James Mason.
Sorry, James Mason is just outstanding as this evil man who has just basically one purpose. He's the ultimate Renfield. He's Renfield beyond the Renfield. He's a Renfield who's in control, which makes him extremely dangerous. And when he says, "Come on, priest, shaman, your fate against the masters," and the priest holds up the crucifix now. And when the vampire grabs the crucifix and bends it and throws it away, because you're dealing with a vampire who's a super vampire. Well, that to me as a child who grew up believing it, watching every Christopher Lee film, that the crucifix did the job, that they did, they didn't fail, and it failing, except for there was one film called The Curse of the Vampires with Sharon Tate, where where the girl pulls a crucifix on a vampire and he goes, "Sorry, I'm Jewish," and he goes and bites her. But that was a comedy film. This was to actually see the scene where the crucifix didn't work was so unbelievably powerful. And then again, Mark knows how to deal with vampires or tries to deal with them. And there's all the other, ancillary characters of the two guys collecting the box from Portland docks in the truck, the Bonnie and her kind of redneck husband, and there's bits of comedy in that, but and the fantastic character of his landlady. There's the character studies in 3 hours of television was remarkably in depth, considering it, and genuinely terrifying. Like the things like the little boy at the window, that was one thing. The two boys actually, and that tapping on the glass, so simple but so powerful. And the part I remember that frightened me the most was when the thing appeared in the prison cell with the boyfriend of the girl that David's soul is like now hitting on, is locked up for beating David's soul up, and appearing in the prison cell. That when it just thing disappears in the darkness, it's terrifying. Yes, it's I mean, what can you say? Outstanding. And I watched it again for this show, this review, and it was actually even better than what I remember as a kid. And there's not many films you can say that about.
I really enjoyed it. We binge watched it all at once, didn't do it in two halves, and the time just went like that. It was great. And it was really typical of Stephen King horror films. He had the rats and the skeletons, and the cobwebs, and everything was there for the aesthetics of it. It was great. And the actual king vampire, those teeth, because you expect vampires to have the fangs, don't you, at the side? These teeth here, but there were two at the front. It was the two front teeth.
Like a rat.
Yes, like a Nosferatu rat. Yeah, that was really, and the jump scares throughout that movie. There was so many of those that started to get me after a while.
And they weren't gratuitous because they were definitely needed in the context of the film.
Because for the first hour, the film goes along quite quietly as it's setting the scene. And then the first incident with the vampire, I won't spoil it, even it was in the graveyard. You're not expecting a jump scare like that. And then you get this, and you just jump off the sofa and actually swear like, what the?
Yeah, yeah. And there was great music in it as well. I thought the use of music was very good. And of course, it's classic New England. You got all these pretty towns interlaced with this horror that's below the surface, what we were talking about in the previous segment.
I wanted to say there's lots of NPCs in it as well in the movie. Nobody wanted to look at the real truth of what was happening until it affected a family member. And even then, they were hard pushed to listen. And when Matt, the old school teacher, comes to Ben and tells him it's actually vampires, Even Ben takes a while to accept it, even though he knew in his heart that it really was. He was more concerned with how they were going to get people to listen to them without them being locked up for being insane. And everybody had such a scientific mind about everything, very rational. It was only the young boy, Mark, who was into his comics, that had an open mind, and Ben, and the school teacher eventually.
Yeah, it was like Mark was the leftover to Puritan New England, and it's hauntology. Almost, he was keeping that spirit alive by building the models and reading comics and books and stuff like that.
And it spread like an illness going through the small town, this thing.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really impressed me when I first saw the film, and again, is like you said, it's a bit slow getting going, but it's kind of builds up the tension nicely. But my God, when it gets going, and it's literally a roller coaster of like horror until the very end.
And at the very end, when they find the home, don't they? They find where this thing sleeps. Because, you know, he's a king vampire, he's a super vampire, but he still needs to sleep in the day, and he can't go out in the day. And they find where he resides, for want of a better word. And when they go in there, all the people that the other vampires had been tapping on the window to get to, they were all in there. And they all woke up, didn't they, at the same time, and started to crawl out of that hole. And you're thinking, come on, move.
And Mark had heard his leg falling down where the steps had been taken away. But wasn't that a homage to the hammer at the end? That was pure Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing trying to get to the vampire before the sun goes down. That was great. Yeah. And then it finishes up with them in Guatemala, and the final sort of like, well, it wasn't the final. That's the whole thing. They can't escape Maine because it's coming after them down in Central America, and they're using the holy water as kind of like a vampire detector, which they start the film with. So there's the prologue and epilogue, like it's very TV actually. It's very TV, but there was a second film called Return to Salem's Lot made in 1987, and it's absolute shite. It's one of the worst films ever made. It looks like a film that somebody knew what a film was in theory and then tried to make a film. It's absolute garbage. You could not find anything on the other end of the spectrum in terms of a fantastic film and then the follow-up being horrific, and it's terrible. It's so badly made and acted. Have you seen the 2004 TV version of Salem's Lot with Rob Lowe? Have you seen that one?
No, but I want to see that now.
It's
One,
good.
because I wanted to see, I mean, I love Rob Lowe, so anything with him in it is great. But now I will give that a look. I'm assuming he plays the writer.
Ben Mears, yeah.
Yeah.
And they kind of play around with the characters and the dynamics of the story that we're used to, and that's a good thing because you don't want a carbon copy of just up to date. And it's written in a different way. He's much more of a cynical character. Rob Lowe is a very underrated actor, I think, and it's I think because he's good, he's kind of like really handsome and stuff, but he's more than that. He's actually a very good actor, and he kind of rises to the part in this film. It suits him. He's kind of a bit snippy and a bit snarky, and he's a bit resentful, but he's also got a lot of depth to his character, and they write different elements in different ways, but it definitely works. It definitely works, and not a bad film at all. He portrays he's coming back to Jerusalem's Lot much more cynical. He thinks that small town Maine is an awful place full of nasty people who pretend they're have a nice day, you all that kind of thing, What up behind that's like nastiness. And then there's other people who live in the town saying, no, you've got it all wrong. Those things do exist, but there's also tremendous goodness, which I thought was really good writing. They play on the dynamic of the deep town. He's coming back to Salem's Lot saying it's a deep town, but that's really his personal experience from this as a child in the Marsden house. So definitely worth watching, but it's, of course, it's not as good as the original and the best, and just sensational, sensational.
Do you know what I thought was one of the eeriest parts of the film? It involved two different scenes. The first one was when they were in the restaurant, the three men, and Ben said, "Do you believe that a place or a house can be inherently evil?" And the guy says, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Do you think that a house can have evil within it, just be inherently evil?" And then later on, towards the end, when they found where this thing was sleeping and they dropped the holy water on the floor by mistake, and that holy water just evaporated into this smoke, like it just showed you how evil that place was when you saw what happened to the water when it hit the floor. And it was like, yep, they're standing on pure evil.
And also James Mason's final moments on the staircase, although he doesn't do much, it's amazing. It's amazing how he goes down the staircase as he's being shot.
Yeah, because he was the vampire's human familiar. And because it took him a while to die when that happened, I actually thought, is he in the process of a transformation here? Because normally they're with the vampire, aren't they? Because they want the eternal life. So they're kind of a servant to the vampire because they want something in return from them. And I wondered if he was in the process, but he went down eventually. Because I'm thinking, oh,
Yes,
he's not going to die. He's not going down. But he did.
the ultimate vampire has the ultimate super Renfield.
Yeah. Because even I thought that's some serious Renfielding that, because he was very suave, very well spoken, very well dressed, very snobbish, but very, very nasty as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the whole cover of an antique shop in a small town to set up their vampiric operation, I thought was great too.
I figured it out there, when the fridge came in on the back of the truck. And I thought, I bet it's the bloody business partner in there. When they brought the vampire in, didn't they? They didn't know. They just
It
thought they were.
wasn't it was a sideboard.
I thought it was a freezing cold fridge. Was it? Was it a
No,
sideboard?
it was a sideboard, but the cold was emanating from the vampire's presence.
Right. So he was in
Yeah,
there with some earth from his home.
yeah. And so he
Factory.
came closer to its prey. It emanated, instead of heat, pure cold.
Right. Yeah. Because they did that as a little bit of a comedy sketch, didn't they? They had the two kind of cowboy / rednecks driving the car, saying, "What? It's moving. It's cold. What's going on?" And it was kind of humorous the way well, I don't know. Don't ask questions. Just bloody deliver it and let's go.
But that was even also kind of frightening. I know what you mean. There's a slapstick element of him trying to get the thing through the bulkhead doors in the bottom of the house, and he just throws the locks down. That was, but that was still terrifying too, because you didn't know what was going to appear.
Yeah. But with the other redneck as well, I don't remember his name, the one with the wife who was a bit wild.
Boom, boom, Bonnie.
Yeah, you thought, oh, her husband's just a bit of a drunk, but he wasn't. He knew what was going on and he was acting dumb on purpose.
Yes, and
That
they got
trick he
away.
pulled on them was quite elaborate. And when he pulled the gun out and the guy that she was in bed with had those red silk boxer shorts. Just, he'd put them on especially because they thought he was out of town. And when he pulled the gun on him and he had to get out of bed in those fancy pants and stand there with a shotgun to his head. And he just sat there because what could he say? I didn't. That was actually quite a scary scene as well, because I thought he was going to pull the trigger.
Especially when he held the shotgun to his chest like this, he was shaking,
Yeah.
and it just went click.
Thinking, oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Great film. Fantastic film.
And next week's film, we are back into the world of the Hammer Horror Studios, and it is the 1960s film The Reptile, starring Sean Phillips. She's having returned from India during the time of the British colonial days, and a young girl who's been affected by an ancient Vedic curse. The Reptile with Sean Phillips, a Hammer movie from the late 1960s. Occasionally in your life, you come across things that you think are nonsense, that they might be conspiracy theories, or they might be Fortean, paranormal events, and so on. And then you kind of deliberately keep a blind eye to it. And then something comes across your focus, and you look a little bit deeper beyond what you had initially been prejudiced against the story, I'd say. And you discover that there indeed is a very profound and deep mystery below the surface, in this case, literally. And we're talking in our second subjects about Oak Island off the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada. Now, Oak Island is a small island that's basically in the middle of the peninsula, and it's just off the coast. And what makes it remarkable is that its legends apparently seem to come true. And there is something very remarkable about these legends. Back in the 1700s, stories started to emerge that there was the treasure worth £1 million back in those days of Captain Kidd's pirate booty buried under the island somewhere. And in the late 1700s, an individual discovered a depression in the ground and started to dig down with some helpers. And they found out that the soil wasn't indeed loose, it wasn't heavily compacted like the rest of the soil on the island. They dug down a substantial depth and way down started to find things that shouldn't have been there, like stone flagstones that were like literally put in to present further digging, oak logs, and even amounts of coconut husks that were buried at such a depth that they couldn't have been there as an aspect of natural accumulation of soil and so on. But they found nothing. Later attempts to open up a hole, which was now called the Money Pit, to find Captain Kidd's booty or whatever it was down there, revealed interesting objects such as a Cornish axe or pickaxe used in mining, and again stones with inscriptions on them. But then when they dug down a remarkable depth of almost 100 feet, and just think about that, if a pirate was going to bury his treasure going down 100 feet into the soil, they found what they believed were saltwater traps, in that deliberate channels and tunnels had been tunneled under the island, that if people got near what was being hidden down there, it would flood with seawater. And it was basically deducted that this is what had happened. Later on, individuals poured red dye down the hole, and they came out of 3 different parts of the island. Now, where the story gets really interesting, the future American president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was captivated by these stories. Now, this is where it gets into the conspiratorial end of things. He was a serious big-time Freemason. In fact, in 1933, he essentially venerated the United States to Scottish Rite Freemasonry by putting the Great Seal of the United States, the pyramid with the eye on top of the back of the dollar bill. And he was captivated by the stories he'd heard growing up, and he began to start with his own team digging down there. Again, they encountered more saltwater traps. Then a later expedition went down there, and also the royal family of England took a very deep interest in what was going on this tiny island off the coast of eastern Canada. And 3 people were killed when sulfuric gases were released at the bottom of the hole and gassed them and killed them. It was almost like elaborate booby traps were set all the way down to the depth in the ground. Since then, several objects have been pulled up, including one of them, which has not been confirmed, which is believed to be a Roman sword. What is a Roman sword doing in Canada, off an island of Nova Scotia, that far deep under the ground? Invariably, the speculator, the researcher, their mind turns towards the Knights Templars and the possibility of the Knights Templars hiding something down there. And you, of course, you think of the treasure, if it was that they found under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And we do know that the Knights Templars, with their fleet and their vast sailing fleet, sailed to the New World at one point, much later on after they'd settled in Scotland. It is at the bottom of Oak Island, the Templar treasure, and not Captain Kidd's treasure. But the events and the findings and what they've dug up there, and even things like how these elaborate seawater traps were created 100 feet under the ground and more to stop people from finding what's ever down there, suggests to me that whoever landed on Oak Island. Now remember, the word druid comes from the Irish, the Gaelic word for oak, drua. And that's another thing that I think people need to start speculating. Those of you who are following this quite interesting story, we could be dealing with the Templar gold down there. We could be dealing with Captain Kidd. We could be dealing with something that goes back way further to Celtic and Roman times. But there's absolutely no doubt that there is something completely remarkable that's going on Oak Island. And I think a lot of this includes TV shows that have been put out there that have been distractions to kind of almost make the thing seem farcical. But whatever is on Oak Island, it is truly remarkable. And whoever initially did the digs and came across these anomalies on that so deep under the ground probably never expected the story to reach a wider distribution, because they didn't anticipate the interest in Forteana and things like mysteries and television documentaries. But there seems to be now a strange kind of like desire to shut it down. But Oak Island, it is a remarkable place, and this, I think there's a real story down there that we might never find out what it is, but whatever it is, it's something incredible. What do you think, Sarah?
I've read some quite bizarre theories about what's down there and why. And one of them, it caught my eye, and I don't know if it's farcical or what. No judgment. It just caught my eye because of the sheer out there-ness of it. Now, I know that the true identity of Shakespeare is up in the air. I know that. And I've heard in the past, or I've read in the past, that it's meant to be Francis Bacon who supposedly penned the literature of Shakespeare because he didn't want to be known as a lowly playwright. So he gave the credit to Shakespeare. And I'm not giving my opinion here, as I honestly don't know enough on the subject to make one. I'm just reporting what I've come across in the past. But I do struggle to make the connection to how a piece of parchment retrieved with the letters VI on it in Indian ink could prove Bacon's authorship. But then, having said that, the subject is huge, and in the time I've had to research this vast topic of Oak Island, it's nowhere near enough to even scratch the surface or do it justice. So I don't understand the connection.
No, that's a very vague one too, and I think that's part of the whole thing to throw people off the trail. We don't know for sure if this piece of sheepskins parchment was even found there, but the fact that it was written in India ink, well, that suggests that it was in a post-Templar time, or that they would have been that had been deposited down there. Certainly not Roman times, unless somebody's playing games with us and the people go down there. But there definitely also seems to be something of a curse associated with it, that every individual, with the exception of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and company, organization, whatever, prospectors who go looking into this thing, terrible things seem to happen to them. It seems to be cursed. So there's almost a magical, supernatural element to it as well.
Well, Yes, John Wayne and Errol Flynn wanted to go having a look round there for the treasure, and Wayne had a rival company that had the rights to look for the treasure, and that prevented Flynn from looking at it, from looking for it. And I believe that that endeavour was one of the reasons why Flynn died penniless at age 50 years old, because of his interest in this island, and then John Wayne's company preventing him from being able to do that. So the money that he'd invested in being able to go there, he lost everything.
You see, no matter what, there's something going on at that place that, should we say, those in the know seem to have a lot more information about than we do. That almost like whispers on the grapevine or in the lodges talk about what's really down there or what might be down there. And you wonder why this tiny island in the cold, Atlantic off the east coast of Canada, why even that place? Why even there? And well, it would be naturally if you're coming across from these islands across to there, it wouldn't be the first place you hit. You'd hit Labrador if you're going directly across. But if you're traveling slightly south, following down below Greenland, you would come there, similar to the area of Vinland where the Vikings were. There's a whole load of hauntology and Forteana on that part of Canada. There has to be, just because it's the first and even they found traces of the red paint people up there too as well. Another connection. My feelings would be, whatever down there, it's probably connected to the Knights Templar. It's probably might not even be real. It might be smoke and mirrors and a ruse. But there's something about that island, and there's something on that island. And you just think of the effort needed to put those elaborate traps 100 feet under the ground, and all those tunnels that had to be dig as saltwater traps. It would have taken huge amounts of people. It would have taken an army, and who had the army? The Templars. Now, some people speculate the Romans could have landed there, and I'm not saying they couldn't, that it wasn't possible, but maybe within Roman archives they talk about sailing past Britain and Ireland and finding another island. I don't know that stuff that well, but I'm be inclined to think if you look at a Knights Templar sword, it looks a lot like a Roman sword. If you look on the graves of Knights Templars, the sword that they actually illustrate looks very similar to a Roman sword in its design, except it has a longer blade. So that would be my speculation about Oak Island, that there's some kind of Knights Templar treasure down there, or secrets, or something, or distraction, and it could well be related to the so-called treasure found under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
It's got to be rumblings within the lodges when you look at the modern day people who've took an interest in the place. You've got film stars, you've got the English royal family, you've got Franklin Roosevelt, you've got Admiral Byrd of Antarctica fame. He also encouraged Franklin Roosevelt to go down there and have a look. All these people, you would expect them to be members of various lodges.
And there's only one other place on earth that has all those same elements, and that's Rennes-le-Château in France, and the stories of Saunier finding the treasure under the ground there. And that attracts all the same kind of Freemasons and celebrities and speculation, everyone else. But one of the things I noticed by its absence doesn't have much interest in the Oak Island stories, the Vatican. The British royal family most certainly do, but the Vatican doesn't, and that also sets off my alarm bells as well.
I do like the stories about the pirates, Captain Kidd, and also Blackbeard is rumoured to have put some treasure down there too. And I did actually learn something. Blackbeard was actually called Edward Teach, And I never for once even considered that these Captain Kids and Blackbeards and Arg pirates even had normal names. They were just Blackbeard to me. I thought that was their names. I never even thought they would have regular names, and never gave much thought to pirates.
The piratical element is terribly romantic. But if you look at all the islands up along the east coast of America, from where we did the Jersey Devil all the way up through Long Island, there's an island in the middle of the two forks of Long Island. I forget what it's called, where Blackbeard's treasure is supposed to be. Also, they all say it's on Block Island between Long Island and Long Island Sound and a few other places. It's terribly romantic. And at the time they started digging all this stuff up, that was all the rage: pirates and pirate gold and pirate treasure. So yeah, that could be a good one. But would pirates have the ability to create such a complex infrastructure as underground sea traps? You think of, I'm not putting down pirates. Obviously, they were able-bodied people who could sail the world, but to me, it reeks of organizational planning on a large scale to hide what was ever down there, and that would be outside the domain of basic piracy. They wouldn't have had time to do that while they were being pursued by the British and French Navy, the Royal Navy and the French Navy, for their piratical behavior. So I'm going to stick with the Knights Templar until I know better. And you'll stick with the pirates.
I'm definitely going to research it some more, because I didn't know much, if anything, about it until we decided to do it for the show. And one of the good things about working on this show is you get to learn so much stuff that you've not been aware of, and that's one of the things that I've not been aware of. And it's a huge subject. And like I say, in the week that I've had to look into it, not even scratch the surface, so I've been able to give it any justice, really. So I want to look into it properly, and I wouldn't mind looking for a book on the subject. I don't know if you can recommend one. Have you got any yourself? Or
No, I have them. I've only read them in issues of 40 times and that kind of thing. But I'm sure there's plenty. I look, that's what the comments are about. Anyone in the comments has more information or sources where we could both look into the mysteries of Oak Island, we'd be very appreciative. Or even to give your theories. That's what it's there for. Because once you get started on that Oak Island thing, Sarah, it becomes a head wrecker. Because you start, it reminds me so much of things like Atlantis and the Nazi bases at the South Pole, that there's something tremendously powerful there, but there's so many deliberate cul-de-sacs you're thrown down. You have to be careful of.
Yeah, so me, these are what I call these are the big topics, big subjects. And even the Renly Chateau, which we did weeks and weeks ago now, if not months ago, with Neil. I'm still reading about that. And I did buy the book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, still picking that up and putting it down. So it's just, you can't just pick a topic and say, oh yeah, I know, I've done that, know that. It carries on. It's just a continual learning cycle.
Well, all we can offer in our half-hour segments in this show is just a taste or introduction, or throw our own little feelings into it. So that was Oak Island, a small piece of land off the side of a huge continent that has within it a head-wrecking secret. And tell us what you know, because we're hungry for the knowledge on that subject. And now we go to our Mary Quant of the consciousness, Sarah, with the psychic hygiene.
As we've previously talked about many times, we live in a world that is fast-paced, unpredictable, and often chaotic. With so much going on around us, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and find that we are being dragged along in other people's dramas or fights. It's important to remember, even in the midst of chaos, we can find our peace and stay centered. First and foremost, it's important not to get drawn into online arguments. Many online disputes are designed to bait you, and before you know it, you're arguing with a stranger and giving your energy to them. As Tucker Carlson recently said, when it comes to digital life, if you can't smell it, don't let it take priority over your real life, both in the physical and the spiritual sense. This doesn't mean that you should avoid the internet altogether, but rather use your online time more creatively. Spend it learning something new, enjoying entertainment from your favorite content creators, or connecting with positive online communities. It's important to control your online time rather than letting it control you. Sometimes it can be helpful to unplug and focus on real-world relationships with the people around you. Finding a balance between your online and offline life is key to staying centered in a world that can feel overwhelming at times. Secondly, it's important to stay present and mindful. Rather than getting caught up in worries about the future or regrets about the past, try to stay focused on the present moment. And you can do this through meditation, deep breathing, or simply taking a few moments to tune into your senses and surroundings. Thirdly, practice gratitude. Even in the midst of chaos, there are always things to be thankful for. Take a few moments each day to reflect on what you're grateful for, and this can help shift your perspective and bring a sense of calm to your day. And finally, surround yourself with positive people and influences. The people we spend time with can have a significant impact on our mental health and emotional well-being. So seek out people who uplift you and inspire you, and try to limit your exposure to negativity and toxic influences. And that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
And it's such an obvious thing, but you don't consciously think about it until you step away from it. It really comes down to whether you're on social media, watching vlogs, watching people's comments online. There's really only the demarcation between sensations online is much more amplified than it is in real on daily life. My attitude towards when I watch videos on YouTube or social media, people I follow or blogs I read, comes down to two things. Either it feels good or it feels bad. Now, feeling good doesn't necessarily mean it makes you feel joyous. It could be terribly interesting and you're learning things. But I find that if you look at your social media and you'll instantly know that the individuals involved are only making you feel good or they're only making you feel bad. And then the choice is very straightforward regarding online internet arguments. Although them things become nests of demons very quickly, and along with that, the dregs of humanity always seem to find them and jump in. And whatever these nests of entities on the social media thing are using these dregs of humanity in order to grab the low-hanging fruit that they can from all the fallout that goes on and things like that. Yes, but it's really, I agree completely what you said, but for me it comes down to one thing. Does this person I'm reading their posts, watching their videos, make me feel better or worse? If they make me feel worse, then I have nothing to do with them. If they make me feel better, I stay on board.
Totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. Just be a bit more mindful of whose content you consume, or maybe even consider creating, rather than consuming content, maybe create some content for
Exactly.
other people, to uplift other people.
Exactly.
Our third topic tonight is regarding the strange and mysterious noises that have been reported around the world coming from the skies. The strange and unexplained noises have been reported for decades, with people describing everything from rumbling, booming, and humming sounds to eerie trumpet-like noises and unexplained whistles. In some cases, the sounds are so loud that they shake windows and even cause buildings to vibrate, and witnesses often describe feeling uneasy and disoriented when hearing these sounds, which seem to come from nowhere and have no discernible source. Many theories have been proposed to explain what these sounds are, including natural phenomena like earthquakes, volcanic activity, and atmospheric pressure changes. However, there are also more supernatural explanations out there, such as alien activity and even the sounds of the apocalypse. One sound in particular is a trumpet sound, and it's also known as sky trumpets or mystery booms, which are unexplained loud noises that have been reported in different parts of the world since 2010. These sounds resemble the blaring of a trumpet or a loud rumbling noise, and there have been many reports of these sounds. The cause of the trumpet sounds remains a mystery. Some people speculate that the sounds are related to geological activity, such as underground explosions or earthquakes. Others suggest that they're caused by man-made sources, such as military exercises or secret experiments. Some believe that they may be a sign of impending doom, while others see them as evidence of extraterrestrial activity. But all around the world, local authorities and city councils have said they will investigate, but nobody has been able to explain what these things are. Some people say they have nightmares after hearing the sounds, but whether that's related to the sound itself or it's the fear of what it could mean, I don't know. Many people think it's God's trumpet, signifying the end of the world, and I can understand how that kind of anxiety would cause you to have nightmares. The phenomena has been described as the blare of a trumpet or a groaning metallic sound, an aeroplane engine sound, a loud rumbling, even a humming noise. And the ones that I've listened to online sounded like a screeching metallic kind of machine sound or a bad trumpet noise with no discernible note. The website strangesounds.org catalogues these incidents from around the world, and it's compiled hundreds of videos of the strange sounds. And those sounds, they really are creepy, and they do invoke some scary images into your head about what they could be or where they could be coming from. Now, having said all that, not all strange noises emit from the sky. In 1997, a strange noise was captured in the Pacific Ocean by underwater microphones, and it was detected by multiple listening stations across the Pacific, and its exact origins remain unknown, but the sound was coming from one source, and the sound was called the bloop, and some experts said that they're certain it sounded organic, and other experts said it was most likely an icequake, whatever that is. Anyway, the interesting thing is that 26 years later, nobody's been able to prove the origin of the bloop. So what's your take on these strange noises from the sky and under the sea?
Well, this is probably one of the few Fortean topics I have direct personal experience of. A while back, a few years ago now, not real long back, but a few years back, about 6, 7, 8 years, maybe more. In the backyard, I heard a colossal hum. Now, it was not coming from my ears, like that's another phenomenon, a hum that people started hearing in the 70s, and initially thought it was a Soviet weapon. No, this was actually coming from the sky. It was coming from space. It was a beautiful starlit night, and there was no planes in the sky. It was incredibly clear visibility. It was coming from space. I could bet money on that. It was so intense. It was making me feel nauseous. And I could feel it on the corrugated shed in the back, vibrating on the corrugation. And it was something I couldn't even begin to describe. It was an audible hum on a low frequency. It didn't sound like the trumpet noises that we see on those videos that really took off in 2008. They were all over YouTube, I remember then. And a lot of them were from Eastern Europe. Now, some of them are definitely synthesizers that someone's playing over a video. But others are like, you see people walking down the street suddenly stopping and doing this. And so they were hearing it too, these people. they seem to mostly, they definitely do come from the sky, and it makes sense. What's up in space will be transmitting audio as well as any kind of electromagnetic energy. Another thing that's very interesting in this subject is a belief that aurora borealis, the northern lights, create a sound. In fact, in among Inuit people and the Sami of Lapland, they say that modern people can't hear them because they've lost the ability. But even the Roman historian Tacitus spoke about seeing the northern lights for the first time and the shapes they formed, and said that other citizens reported that they made a noise. So the northern lights seems to create a noise too that only certain people can detect. Indigenous people, in fact, the Inuit were quite specific that Western people, modern Western people, had lost the ability to do it. The white man couldn't do it anymore. And that was a very interesting one. There's also the music of the spheres, which was commonly reported up until the Renaissance period of Tycho Brahe, the famous astronomer, even, reported hearing it, where the stars made music or the sky made music. And we've had that recent, and this is very interesting, I have to think about it. We had that recent release by NASA of the sound from a black hole. Absolutely terrifying, but did sound a lot like those kinds of sounds that we hear. So I believe that they come from space. These ones that come from the sky, they're coming from space. They're caused by some kind of pressure wave or something, a sound traveling through space, perhaps even emitted by a black hole thousands of years ago, finally arriving here as some other kind of celestial object. Regarding the bloop, it actually appears that the sound actually originated from the southern pole of inaccessibility, Point Nemo, where Cthulhu was supposed to be. And the New Scientist magazine had a scientist who said it doesn't sound like an ice shelf, it sounds like an organic animal, a gigantic animal, which was kind of amazing when it happened initially. Now, they released a speeded up version of it, which I never understand why they release speeded up versions. Why don't they let us hear the real thing? And if you slow down the sound of the bloop to its natural sound, it sounds like a gigantic undersea animal sighing or yawning or something. So yeah, I think that was a one-off. We don't the bloop. You don't hear too much about that. But regarding the sounds from the sky, there's definitely space, and this is where the concept of Gabriel's trumpet at the end of the world comes from. The angel blowing the trumpet on the judgment card in the tarot. That's where that comes from. And maybe that was inspired by people in earlier times hearing these same sounds that we did.
Would the sound coming from space, would it take a long, would we be hearing it as it's being emitted, or would it take like light years to arrive here?
Very difficult question to answer. If it happened just above the Earth, somewhere in the solar system, it would be basically live. But if it was the remnant of some shock wave or sonic wave that traveled across space, now they call space a vacuum, but it isn't a complete vacuum. Sounds can be it's not like a vacuum, like everything has been sucked out of it. There is stuff in there. There's just not a lot of it. So would it be, and spaceships do make noise in space when they fire their thrusters and so on. So it's not completely silent. It may be sent as some kind of wave of energy that when it hits the Earth's atmosphere, then the Earth's atmosphere acts like the diaphragm on a speaker, or the ionosphere, or one of those kinds of things, the magnetosphere, and that vibrates, giving us the sound on Earth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've never heard those noises as like trumpets and things like that, but I have been awoken in the night to a loud humming noise coming from the window, and I've wanted to have a look. It's been that loud, but I've kind of felt like something told me it's none of my business, so I couldn't get out of bed and go and have a look. That was that was weird.
Well, that was the sound that I heard, and it made me feel upset. I didn't. It made me feel not nauseous or disorientated. It made me feel very, very uncomfortable, if not filled me with a slight sense of dread.
Right.
And
I
that
just
made
got the
me,
feeling it was none of my business.
yeah, it was not very pleasant. I remember that. And it worried me because I thought something was, my initial thing was that an electrical transformer nearby had shorted or something and was humming, but it wasn't that because there's no power lines nearby of that size with the big electrical transformers. And it was definitely, I mean, you know where the sound is coming from. It was coming from space. And it wasn't a plane in the sky because I could look up and see there was no plane up there.
This is going to sound a bit out there. I'll try and it just come to me now. Do you remember in the early days of the Rona when we talked about, or well, rather, you talked on your vlogs about the possibility of watch the skies, and it could be this spiritual force that's kind of taken the world hostage, could have been um, floating by in space. Do you know what I mean? And it's heard us sending out signals.
Or the earth passed through it.
We passed through it, yeah. I was
Yes.
wondering, could these noises be something similar, that we might be passing through something, or something is passing by within cosmic earshot of us?
Well, that's what puzzled me so much back then, is that why I kept looking up at the sky. I was saying, whatever we're experiencing now, why am I concerned with the sky? And I was trying to say, oh, you're thinking of Quatermass 4, where rings don't round and they beamed the thing down to lift up the planet people. And I was thinking, yeah, probably that's my head. And then I tried to rationalize in the vlogs by saying, is the whole thing a cover story for asteroids? Could it be that we're like that there's an asteroid passing by the Earth and they don't know if it's going to hit or not, so they're keeping us all at home or something like that? There was lots of, but I'm still I'm still have this powerful sense that I hate to use the word revelation because of the biblical aspects, but and then to connect it to the cosmos is either happening or on the cards, and it's somehow connected to the Rona. I don't know why. I can't explain why. But it was like in the early days, remember when they first locked down, there was that eerie silence everywhere, where people weren't allowed to travel, and the roads were so quiet, and I remember the weather was beautiful, and subsequently the nights were filled with stars, and I was just like drawn to this concept that there was something from space that had somehow, and then I had to keep checking myself. Oh, this is your Lovecraftian aficionado part of your personality coming out, or your Nigel Neal Quatermass thing coming out. But I don't think so. I believe that science fiction authors are prophets. They're the prophets of the age, and whether they're Lovecraft, Philip K. Dick, or Nigel Neal, they write about what's coming down the road, and it happened. Arthur C. Clarke, and it happens. And yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, that we could, these could be pockets of something in space, and the Earth passes through them on its journey through the cosmos.
Yes, and with regards to what you were saying there, with what you was thinking in the vlog, I had a similar idea myself, where something has arrived here, but it's not arrived here in ships and things. It's arrived here through the needlecraft, and then it's here in physical form in the Mother Hydra's babies.
Well, we're both down with that one. And even in the early days, the Rona, when they started talking about the needlecraft, I had found all this artwork that I had over the years of an alien nurse with a syringe in her hand, a painting I did from 2006 or something, and a church that I had drawn, and with the spire was a needle, as if, and it was almost like I was having these prophecies in the old days through this artwork and doodling and even paintings and even lots of things. I mean, lots, you go back to lots of my vlogs before 2000, right up very close to 2019. I'm talking about there's something about the come. There's something that's to do. It's going to be surrounding public safety. In fact, I even did a long car log video, and I think it was in November 2019, about the Committee on Public Safety in post-revolutionary France. And I said, something like that's going to come again. And it happened like a month, 2 months later. So I think, I do believe in prophecy and I do believe in seers. Now, whether I'm a prophet or a seer, I don't know. I think we all have this, but I just think because I have worked on things creatively for so long that it's probably easier for me, but I think we all have these abilities. I think many of us felt something freaky at the end. 2018 was a particularly nasty year. There was something very nasty about it. And then 2019 was a strange year. And then we went into the whole event. But yet the sounds, the Christians' belief that in the book of Revelations that the Gabriel's, I think it is, the angel Gabriel blows trumpet to signal the apocalypse. Well, what does apocalypse mean? The removal of the seal, the opening up so you can see things as they really are, the revelation. And what do we always say? Greatest education ever. So, and yeah, I don't know what the latest. I haven't looked. I mean, we decided to do this topic, but I didn't research it because I know a lot about it. But I'm not aware of recent events of this. Have you come across that there's been any recent events of these strange noises?
No, but I did go onto the strangesounds.org website and I did notice that in 20, because they do it by year and they have all the videos listed, and the 2020 listings were kind of off the scale in comparison to the other years for these sounds. Whether that was because it was quieter, I don't know, or whether that was because what we were going through kind of signaled whatever this thing is, it was related to it. I don't know.
Or else the sirens stop when the bombing starts.
All that, yes, because that was it then, wasn't it? We was in a full-blown conflict then, but a lot of us, well, nobody was listening, was they?
No, because that just like when a bombing raid happened, the sirens happened, then the bomb, and then the sirens blow the all clear. Perhaps in the next few months or years, we'll have a sudden flurry, I hope, of these sirens giving us the all clear.
If it was something from outer space that came and did that, and they came here through the needlecraft, is it finished in the sense that they've got the culling that they wanted, or all these Mother Hydra's babies, where have they gone?
Well,
Have they been burnt?
the only thing there's a point. The only thing I can know, I can say for sure, I honestly 100% know, and I can say this unequivocally, is that the last 3 years were a supernatural event. Yes, I know we had the politics and all the other things going on along around that, but ultimately at the bottom of it was a gigantic supernatural event. I have no doubt about that. My belief is whatever this force is, it vanished around last November, as if like it either went or we went through and came out the other side of that thing. But I know we all felt it. There was a specific sense of tension that wasn't only evidential by the actual emotional effect the lockdowns and so on had on us. It was beyond that. It was a sense of pure evil, whatever evil is in this context. But I felt in my heart and in my soul, particularly during the first lockdown and then towards Christmas 2020 to 21, that there was an evil, evil force present in the world.
Just like the young boy in Salem's Lot, his interest in the Fortean saved his life in that movie. And I think the same for a lot of us as well, who's got an interest in the supernatural and the Fortean and the unexplained. We kind of saw through it a lot sooner, and we felt it, and the nervous system picked up on something wasn't right, and it wasn't just the powers that be on this earth.
And it was something that we'd never experienced in our lives before. Oh, this is a whole unique thing, so absolutely, yeah, I totally agree with that 100%.
So maybe the tribes now are similar to the two characters in South America at the end of the movie.
Very possibly. What does Brenmere say? They found us. And then Mark says we have to move on, and he goes, not just yet. So it's like, will we for the rest of our lives be playing a game of cat and mouse with this force?
Don't know. I don't know what's more terrifying, really, if it came from outer space, or whether it came from another dimension. It was more of a spiritual force. I don't know what's more.
It's remarkable how this topic has started out with sound and drifting the way it is, because as you will see in the book reviews, it's also going to be ferociously synchronistic. And synchronicities are everywhere when you start tapping into what's really at the root of these things. It's almost like the universe saying, throwing you, breadcrumbs, follow this trail. And I know that like synchronicities were flying when I started to think about all this stuff and what it really was, a supernatural experience.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's the same feeling I had. Funny enough, that was the same feeling the night I heard that hum. The same feeling that this wasn't frightened of it. It was like it was puzzling, irritating, and deeply unsettling.
Didn't you hear one a few weeks ago as well?
Did I hear one? No, I think it
I
was
remember you told me an explosion or something, and I said, "Oh, what time was that?" Because that's when I had
a bang. I heard a bang, but not the
bang.
hum.
Right.
Yeah, bang, but I didn't hear a hum. That could be anything. A bang could be a sonic boom from from a meteorite entering the atmosphere.
Yeah, I've never heard anything like that in the sky. Like I say, I've just heard the humming when I've been at home, and it's kind of come from the window. I've not been outside and heard a hum.
Well, I think if you had went outside or opened your window, you would have heard the hum that I heard.
Right. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't physically get out of bed because something kept saying in my head, "It's none of your business. It's none of your business. Just turn over and go back to sleep." So I did.
Where I got out of bed and went out and investigated and didn't like it one bit. So
True.
everybody, that's the strange environmental sounds would be a good name for this segment. What in the sea, if you heard them in the sea, in the sky, in the woods, in the street, let us know. I was on Hare and the Hawthorne with Kate and Neil there a while back, and Neil had mentioned that he heard one on Merseyside identical to the one I heard, and he knew that he wasn't alone because other people around him were going like this. So if you have any more stories like that, let us know in the comments.
And now is the moment you've been waiting for. Thomas is here to unveil the direction of those prevailing psychic winds. So fasten your seatbelts and hang on tight to your Renfield raincoats, because it doesn't matter if it's raining buckets or the sun is shining bright. Thomas has got you covered with the only forecast that matters, the psychic weather report.
Psychic weather report this week, from watching around social media and dealing with the public, seems to be snide remarks, passive aggressiveness, and underhanded comments. Why and how these things happen and why certain individuals seem to want to do them, I don't know. People who do not have the bravery or directness to come out and say something will drop snide remarks. We've all done that in our lives. It's often done through the auspices of sarcasm, but it's not like that this week. I've noticed that there's a lot of snarky, underhanded, passive aggressive comments out there. What this means, I don't know. usually when I've been in places where I experienced these things a lot, there was usually just an instability in the workplace or something like that. So maybe there's an instability within the zeitgeist that's leading to this. But that's the psychic weather this week. Double comments, snide remarks, underhanded passing statements, passive aggressiveness, and snarkiness without being direct and honest and upfront. And that's the psychic weather with me, Thomas Sheridan.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, noticed that myself. Just observe it and don't get involved in it. It goes back to the psychic hygiene. It's good to know it's there, but just scroll on by.
Yeah, it's like an infantile version of opportunist energy harvesting, I've noticed.
And 9 times out of 10, when you come across what you're describing, they want a response.
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
a reason for that. They want your energy. So don't give it to them.
You have a psychic firewall for a reason.
Now it's time for the Fortean book review section of our show. Every week we crack open and dust off the spines of some of the most thought-provoking books that have graced our bookshelves over the years. It's a chance to indulge in a little bit of show and tell, sharing the books that have inspired us and ignited our imaginations with the hope of providing you with some inspiration for your next read. And my book this week is The Penguin Book of Witches by Kate Howe. And if you're looking for an intriguing account of the history and folklore of witches, then this is the book to fulfill that. It's a fascinating collection of historical documents, stories that explore the many facets of the witch, from the traditional image of the hag to the more modern interpretation of the empowered witch. The book's divided into sections, and each section explores a different aspect of the witch's history and mythology, from the early depictions of witches as malevolent figures who consorted with the devil to the more recent portrayal of witches as symbols of feminine power and resistance. And the author traces the evolution of the witch throughout history and across lots of different cultures. And she even sheds some new light on the Salem witch trials using primary source documents, including first-hand accounts from the actual trials themselves, as well as writings on witchcraft from the period. The book also looks at the ways in which cultural views about power and religion also played a role in the witch hunts of the late 17th century. And she draws on a wide range of historical documents, from the trial transcripts to fairy tales to all kinds of things, to provide the book with a distinct understanding of what the witch is. And it is a must read for any witchcraft enthusiast, or indeed anyone who's just got an interest in the folklore and mythology of witches.
I have a few books like that myself. I don't have that one. And I do enjoy those kinds of books, but I'll be interested in hearing what she has to say about Salem, because I have my own ideas about that. So yeah, and I like the cover too. Bit stereotypical, but a nice piece of graphic design. The graphic designer in me says, that's beautiful. The pagan inside me says, go away.
Yeah, and it's Penguin as well. Penguin were always a little bit twee, aren't they, with their book covers? And
yeah, well, they stick them in books, the books you get in train stations and the things like that.
Yeah.
And my book this week is Joseph Campbell's final book that he wrote in 1986 before he died in 1987. And it is The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, Metaphor and Myth as a Religion. Bit of a funny one, this one, but it's worth the dive. A lot of Joseph Campbell type Puritans who grew up in his books, such as The Hero with a Thousand Faces, didn't actually like this book. And I think one of the reasons is he was starting to doubt Christianity. Well, not doubt it, but he was almost like coming out against the concept of Christ as being an actual person. And this went down very badly in the United States. particularly as a lot of his followers had been Christians. And Joseph Campbell had often talked about the symbolic nature of the crucifixion and the resurrection and the image of Christ as a real being. He never really spoke about it, metaphor. He comes out right out in this book and refers to Jesus and Buddha as fictional characters. And in order for us to not become sectarian or violent, the best way to approach our religious figures is purely as mythical things and not real entities. Therefore, we would avoid sectarian conflicts. And that's pretty much paganism, what he's describing there. The book came out of a series of lectures given in San Francisco in the mid-80s that included astronauts and also members of the Grateful Dead. And it was about the concept of mythology going forward. The title is a bit misleading because it doesn't really have to do with the concept of mythology extending into outer space. It's more a case of, maybe from what I gather, dealing with mythology now in a different way that will serve us better as we enter into a different technological future. The book, to be fair, is a bit all over the place at times, as if it is notes from a lecture. So that just puts some people off. I think that was more of a case not of Joseph Campbell's writing, but they could have done with better editing. In fact, if there's one book that could actually do with being re-edited, I think it's this. Some people were actually very hostile about it, and they said that Campbell came across as rambling and insane. But he wasn't. He was sort of like coming into a kind of what we are in Hocus Focus, into a kind of a Fortean pagan mindset, because he was starting to connect dots in different ways he hadn't before. Actually, this is worth it just for a new understanding of the Kundalini that he puts across in the book, and also relates it to early Christian art in Ireland and the symbolism of Celtic interlaced animals on manuscripts and so on. He covers his old favorites like James Joyce in particular, and a lovely section on the book, The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And it's a swan song. It's Joseph Campbell's swan song. I liked it very much. It's something you have to like put the effort into reading it, because unlike, it doesn't flow in the same way the Hero with a Thousand Faces flows. It again, that's editing, and it's the editorship of the book, and it is written from basically a source of lecture notes. Having said that, there's lots of gems in here, and it's a shame that he died soon afterwards, because it's clear from this book that a new Joseph Campbell was emerging. And well, maybe the whole thing is for the rest of us to pick up the baton. So if you like Joseph Campbell and you're a Joseph Campbell Puritan, you might find this book a bit scattered and a bit all over the place and not what you're used to. If you're a Joseph Campbell Christian mystic type and oriented, you might not like it at all. Also, if you're not a Buddhist, you might not like it either. But I think he made a beautiful point that we should take our gods as not literal beings, but as metaphors and myth. And it's definitely worth a dive. It's got like the usual. It's also got a phenomenal section on art and the meaning of art and the artist. Well, that's classic Joseph Campbell. Plenty of illustrations of indigenous art and so on around the world. He also does an interpretation, very interestingly, of what they call the Illuminati pyramid, the seal of the United States with the all-seeing eye on top inside this, which is interesting because it's one of the few non-conspiratorial sources that does this. That's very interesting. And that's also another reason why the mainstream normies said, oh, I don't like Joseph Campbell's last book. It sounds like the scattered ravings of a madman. No, it is an insight into a man who was becoming across his second awakening. So, The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, Metaphor and Myth and as a Religion by Joseph Campbell, 1987. Yeah, give it a go. It'll pay off, and you learn a lot too. You always learn things from his books.
Can you imagine how peaceful the world would be if the main religions didn't take the gods so seriously and they viewed them as mythological rather than real.
90% of what they feel compelled to defend would be
Just dissolve.
Yeah.
What a wonderful. Now that's a utopia I could get behind instead of all this build back better.
Well, also, like getting into Christian mysticism, perhaps the symbolism of the resurrection and the crucifixion is the destruction of that religion. You know, that kind of like Gurdjieff idea that you slaughter all you believe in order to depend upon yourself. That's just my theory, folks. Don't pick on me.
Well, it's time to wrap up another fantastic episode of our show, and we hope you enjoyed the discussions and insights and the entertainment we've brought you tonight. And we want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude for each and every one of you who've taken the time to tune in and watch the show, because without your support, we couldn't do what we love doing, and we appreciate it more than you know. If you've enjoyed tonight's episode, please give us a like and share it with your friends and family. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our channels and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. We are thrilled to be part of your Sunday evenings, and we promise to continue bringing you engaging, informative, and thought-provoking content.
Yes, just to reiterate what Sarah said, thank you for all your support and great comments and sharing us around. When Sarah and I started this show, we initially were looking into basically a pure Fortean show, but as it's developed, it's moved more towards the hauntological and psychological and almost a philosophical end of the spectrum, which I know we're both very happy about because that's been a natural evolution of Hocus Focus. It was something we didn't plan. And it's also something that's central to, as Sarah mentioned at the beginning of the show, a side project that we're both working on that we'll be told about at a later date. So thanks again, and thanks for being patient and dealing with us as we sort of explore our own Hocus Focus in the context of this show as the weeks go by. And now, without further ado, it is Sarah is going to give us the tarot card of the week.
And this week's card that I picked is a theme going here because we've got swords again. It's the Queen of Swords. And the Queen of Swords is seen on the card sitting on a throne made of stone, and it's adorned with a cherub and butterflies, and that represents both her softer and transformative natures. And she faces forwards with her left hand raised, open to receive knowledge and insights. And in her right hand, she holds a sword, which symbolizes her determination to seek out and uphold truth in all situations. And the Queen of Swords often represents a person in your life who embodies her qualities, or it may represent an aspect of your own personality that you need to express. This person or energy is characterized by their sharp intellect and their ability to communicate clearly and assertively, and their rational and analytical mind. You may be facing a situation where you need to make a decision that requires logic and reason rather than emotion and intuition. And the Queen of Swords advises you to approach this situation with a clear and focused mind, and to cut through any confusion or uncertainty to get to the heart of the matter. In matters of communication, the Queen of Swords encourages you to be direct and truthful in your interactions with others. This might mean having difficult conversations or speaking your mind in a way that may not be comfortable, but it's important to prioritize honesty and transparency in your relationships. The Queen of Swords can also represent a need for self-care and self-preservation, and you may need to set boundaries or priorities and prioritize your own needs in order to avoid being drained or overwhelmed by the demands of others. And the card asks you to embrace your inner wisdom and strength and to approach situations with a clear and objective perspective. By taking on her qualities of rationality, assertiveness, and honesty, you can navigate challenges and achieve success in all areas of your life.
She's also the card of tough love. The individual, generally a woman, who'll say, no, you've got to get your act together and do this, and be very cutting and direct with this advice. I remember long ago talking with some friends about what cards in the tarot represent, like psychopaths or borderlines or pathological individuals, serial killers. And a couple of people said, well, maybe the Queen of Swords. And I said, no, the Queen of Swords is closer to a fairy godmother who shows tough love, than a pathology. She's not vindictive or vicious or anything like backstabbing. That's the Queen of Wands. There's also a theory that a sword is a wand with a charge, a genuine magical charge, rather than a blunt instrument of thumping. And definitely the Queen of Wands in reverse is a borderline female or a female sociopath. But the Queen of Swords isn't. She's the old fashioned matron in the hospital ward who made sure all the patients were. She seemed tough and cold on the surface, but she made sure that all the patients were looked after, and the nurses and orderlies did her job. I really like the Queen of Swords figure, and she's a stoic female, and she's like dare to, not pussyfoot or play around, or just get straight to the point. So good night, everybody.
Yes, see you next week. Good night.